So next I would like to talk a little bit about storms in life. Now, in this short conversation we're about to have, we're going to talk about storms in the literal sense, and we're going to talk about more metaphoric storms, things that have happened to you that may have thrown you off track, and how to remedy that, and what the cost of trying to take shortcuts may be. In Acts 27, we have basically Paul on a ship sailing for Rome. Now, mind you, this is towards the end of Acts, and he is still imprisoned under watch. So, let's go ahead and read the passage first, and then I'll kind of see if I can guide where we're going here. We're going to start with Acts 27, verse 27. On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea, when about midnight the sailors sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. Now, before I read any further, let me go back and say that they are in the midst of a storm. When they're sailing, Paul had made a suggestion as to how to avoid this, which you can read. And nobody listened to him, so now they're in the middle of this storm. So they're taking these soundings, they're taking these measurements, and at the end of verse 29 it says they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. Now, I've heard a quote once. I forget who it was by. I think it was just by an ordinary gentleman. It said, "The anchor won't stop the storm from arriving, but it will keep you in place when the storm arrives." The anchor will not stop the storm from arriving, but it will keep you in place. So they dropped 4 anchors, and they prayed for daylight. So this is where we would fully be dependent on God as our anchor, both literally and metaphorically, praying for daylight. Now, Paul was praying to the one God that he knew could help them with their situation. The others, not so much. It says, "In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some more anchors from the bow." Now, Paul is steadfast in verse 31 in the Lord and is confident that God can fix this. He says, "Paul said to them, 'Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved.'" So basically he's saying, if you guys get on these lifeboats, no one's going to live. So the soldiers cut the ropes and held the lifeboat and let it fall away. So it's very, very important here. There's a couple of things going on. God will give us a literal anchor in life. In any storm, God will give us an anchor, something to hold on to, something physical, something tangible, and that is maybe our church, or maybe that's our Bible, our holy word. But he will also give us things that we cannot see, such as what Paul saw that no one else saw. Paul was able to stay firm in this situation by telling them, hey, don't run away from this. Stay here. Ride out the storm because we have an anchor. Paul was confident in doing this. So through that, while others were trying to run away and escape, Paul had faith and Paul had hope in the anchor, his anchored faith in Jesus Christ. So he tells them that, sorry about that, I hit a button on my computer. He said, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. Now, saved in the sense of making it through the night. However, if you're not anchored in Christ, the chances of you being saved are slim to none. In a more life sense. So in the end, they took Paul's advice, and the end of the story in verse 44, the last verse, says that those who could swim ashore were ordered to swim ashore, and then verse 44 says the rest were to get their own planks or pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. So, they reached the land safely because of their anchor, and it's so important to realize that we are not just given the anchors in life that we can see, because, for one, half of the anchors that we can see in life are not anchors at all. They're distractions, and they may appear to be able to help us, but they're really not going to. Just like the soldiers were cutting the lifeboats. Paul knew that for those that did not have a strong faith in Christ, that this lifeboat would have the same picture as God to them as Paul has of the true God. That's why they were flocking to these boats, and they were just thinking, we got to get out of here. But, Paul saw a lifeboat in his mind that could not be destructed, that could not be cut from a rope and tossed in sea. He saw a lifeboat that would get them through, and it really did. Now, everyone knows about the Titanic, and when the Titanic sank, speaking of lifeboats, how many more lives would be saved? How many more lives would have been saved on the Titanic if they would have used the lifeboats? Now, on the Titanic, we're going to shift tracks a little bit. The Titanic had anchors, but they did not drop anchors. They had lifeboats.